Welcome to the deep dive. For a long time, the story we told ourselves about social media was pretty positive, right? A real force for democracy, mobilizing people, giving everyone a voice.
Yeah, that narrative has definitely taken a sharp turn. The sources we're looking at today, especially this really thorough analysis from the European Parliament Research Service, the EPRS, and also some key guidance on media literacy from the ZHAW, they paint, well, a much darker picture.
It's not just a flawed tool anymore, according to these sources. It's more like a systemic risk.
Exactly, a profound risk to the very foundations of democracy. The argument isn't just that, bad actors misuse the platforms.
Right. It's the platforms themselves, the design.
Precisely. The whole business model built on capturing attention, harvesting data, maximizing engagement, it seems to be fundamentally undermining core democratic principles.
So when we talk about what democracy needs to function, thinkers like Robert Dahl come up. He talked about enlightened understanding, didn't he?
He did. It's this idea that every citizen needs to be able to get information, understand the political options, and basically form their own opinions autonomously. And these sources, well, they identify 5 big risks that directly attack that.
Okay, what are they?
Surveillance, personalization, disinformation, moderation or the lack thereof, and micro-targeting. They argue these systematically chip away at individual autonomy, equality, and that very enlightened understanding Dahl talked about.
So that's our plan for this deep dive then. First, we'll really unpack those 5 systemic digital risks identified at the EU level. We'll look at how they work, what the data says.
And then, once we've got a handle on the systemic threats, we'll pivot. We'll look at the human side, the defense mechanism, if you will, media competence.
Media competence,
Yeah.
using that ZHAW guidance to see how we can actually equip people, especially young people, to handle these challenges in their digital lives, which are getting, well, more complex every day.
Okay, let's start with the first pillar. You could almost see it as the foundation for the others. Surveillance.
Hmm.
And we need to think broader than just, companies collecting data for ads.
This is political surveillance, using this private infrastructure.
Yes. And when we hear digital political surveillance, maybe we immediately think of authoritarian regimes, right?
Sure, that's the obvious example.
But the EPRS analysis, it's really clear this isn't limited to those states. Governments across the board are using these tools.
Okay, so what are they actually doing with this capability? Monitoring citizens.
They are monitoring citizens, identifying politically active individuals, maybe potential dissenters. The literature calls them smart repression techniques.
Smart because they're subtle or cheap.
Both, really. Compared to the old ways, hiring loads of informants, physical harassment, mass arrests, digital surveillance is just exponentially cheaper. It's easier to automate, needs fewer people.
So these platforms, originally designed just to connect people, they've become this detailed map of political views for governments worldwide. That level of visibility is kind of staggering.
It really is. And just knowing that this monitoring might be happening, even if it's not overt, it has this major psychological impact. It's called the chilling effect.
Ah, the chilling effect. And the sources link this to something called the spiral des Schweigens.
Yes, the spiral of silence. It's a key sociological concept for understanding how this works online.
Okay, let's break that down. The spiral of silence. What's the core idea?
Well, the theory basically says that people are constantly kind of scanning the environment, trying to gauge public opinion if they feel their own view is in the minority or, if they feel unsafe expressing it online.
They're less likely to speak up
Yeah.
because they fear being isolated or, in this context, maybe actual consequences.
Exactly. So the chilling effect happens when just the suspicion of being watched, even without direct threats, makes people self-censor online political expression. They hold back proactively.
And that silence feeds itself, right? The dominant view looks even stronger, suppressing real debate even more.
Precisely. And it's not just theoretical. The sources point to actual data. After the NSA revelations came out in 2013,
Snowden. Yeah, I remember that.
there was an immediate, measurable drop in internet traffic to certain sensitive Wikipedia pages. Things related to terrorism, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
People just stopped looking up information because they were afraid their searches were being tracked.
Wow. So that directly hits that enlightened understanding we need. People stop seeking knowledge out of fear.
It cripples it. But it's not just state surveillance. There's also this structural problem, a fundamental clash between how the platforms make money and our individual political autonomy.
Right. The attention economy. Explain that, Clash.
Okay, so democracy needs citizens who can think for themselves, act independently, form opinions freely, right?
Hmm.
without being unduly pushed around.
Makes sense.
But the business model of these platforms, the attention-based model, it's specifically designed to exploit our basic human needs and, frankly, our cognitive biases.
Like needing social approval, that little dopamine hit from a like.
Exactly that. Or the constant pull of notifications, those reward signals. The platform's goal is simply to keep you engaged for as long as possible.
Often by pushing stuff that's sensational, maybe even extreme, just to harvest more data, show more ads.
Correct. And the sources argue that by deliberately engineering addiction, maximizing engagement, think about YouTube's recommender algorithm, which apparently drove something like 70% of views at one point.
70%. Wow.
These systems actively damage our individual autonomy. You're not scrolling because you made a conscious choice. You're scrolling because the design is basically hijacking your psychology.
And if you can't control your own time and attention.
Then your ability to reflect autonomously on politics is seriously compromised.
But it's weird, isn't it? Platforms want maximum influence, yet the sources also mention Politikverdrossenheit, political indifference, or apathy. How can they be super influential and make people tune out politics?
It's a strange side effect, maybe even unintentional, of that attention model. The platforms tend to prioritize content that goes viral, that's sensational, often like kind of low stakes emotionally. You know, the classic funny cat videos.
Because that gets the clicks, the engagement.
Right. So while you can use these platforms for political organizing, their sort of default mode, the thing they're best at, is distraction. By constantly pushing the sensational, they pull public attention away from the complex, sometimes boring work of politics.
So even if they didn't cause the apathy in the first place, which probably has deeper roots.
They act as this huge amplifier for it. They sustain the indifference. One source mentioned political content is maybe only 6% of what U.S. users see on Facebook.
Only 6%. Yet these platforms dominate public discourse.
Exactly. So you have this structural indifference driven by profit, sitting very awkwardly alongside immense power over public life. The result: a population that's potentially surveilled, distracted, and maybe disengaged from the hard graft of democracy.
That's a pretty damning look at the incentives. Okay, let's use that surveillance data as the input and move to the second pillar: personalization. This is how that data shapes your reality, potentially fragmenting the public square.
Yeah, content isn't really shared universally anymore, is it? It's tailored. And this happens in, well, two main ways. Explicitly, like when you choose to follow specific people or topics.
Or implicitly, through the algorithms.
Right. Powerful secret algorithms predict what they think you want to see based on everything they know about you. Your clicks, your likes, your network, everything. The only goal is keeping you on the platform longer.
And this algorithmic tailoring, that's where we get these concepts like filter bubbles and echo chambers.
Exactly. They dominate the discussion about media risks. Let's start with Eli Pariser's term, filter blazon or filter bubbles.
Okay, what's the core idea of a filter bubble?
It describes how a user's worldview can get really narrow because the algorithm limits the range of information they see. You end up kind of isolated in your own unique information world.
And the danger is you miss out on opposing views or just different perspectives.
Yeah, it can make it much harder to form opinions autonomously, especially because often you don't even realize your content is being filtered like that. It happens invisibly.
Then there are echo chamber and echo chambers. That sounds similar, but maybe more about reinforcement.
It is. Echo chambers are more about the reinforcing effect when groups that think alike mainly see content that confirms what they already believe. The algorithm basically plays on confirmation bias.
So it strengthens the group's consensus, makes it harder to talk to people outside the group.
Right. It can definitely worsen social and political polarization because those opportunities for broad political dialogue just shrink or disappear.
Okay, but here's where it gets interesting. The source material, it seems to add some nuance here, suggesting maybe the impact isn't quite as widespread as we often think.
That's a really critical point, yes. Some solid recent research suggests the dangers of both filter bubbles and echo chambers might be overstated for the general population.
How so?
Well, some studies find personalization doesn't actually reduce the overall diversity of content most people see online that much. And you have to remember, our social networks, they're not perfect bubbles. They often include people from different parts of our lives: family, work colleagues, old friends.
So they're not these completely sealed off intellectual zones.
Not usually. And for most people, social media isn't their only source of news. They still get info from TV, newspapers, conversations.
Okay, but if the general population isn't trapped in perfect bubbles, why does political polarization still feel like it's getting worse, especially in places like the US or the UK? Is the research missing something?
That's where the risk still seems very real. The effect appears to be concentrated. It hits hyper-partisans,
Yeah.
much harder those folks who are already really engaged, maybe at the political extremes.
For them, the algorithms are like fuel on the fire.
Pretty much. It can act like a radicalization tool, locking in extreme views. And the polarizing effect is definitely stronger in two-party systems where everything feels very binary compared to multi-party systems where you kind of expect more fragmentation anyway.
So the personalization risk is still a genuine threat, just maybe more targeted than universal.
I think that's a fair way to put it. It reminds us that democracy can be destabilized not just when everyone is radicalized, but when key groups lose the ability to talk to each other.
Makes sense. The source also mentioned a philosophical angle, that maybe some conflict is good for democracy.
Yeah, some theorists argue that friction and disagreement are vital signs. But the concern here is that this specific type of algorithmically driven polarization isn't really about genuine civic debate. It's manufactured, covert, and driven by profit.
Okay, let's shift gears to the third pillar, where the intent is clearly harmful. Disinformation, manipulation, and the sheer scale automation allows.
Right. And to be clear here, we need to get the terms straight, as the sources do. Misinformation, feel information, that's false info shared, but without intending harm. An honest mistake.
You okay?
Disinformation, that's false info shared knowing it's false, specifically to cause harm, whether it's political disruption or financial gain.
And there was a third one.
Malinformation, that's sharing information that is true, but sharing it specifically to cause harm, like leaking private emails, even if they're real.
Got it. So the core problem here isn't new lies have always existed, but it's the scale and speed social media enables.
Massively. It provides this incredibly powerful global infrastructure for spreading disinformation much more cheaply and efficiently than ever before.
What makes it so efficient?
Three things, really.
Yeah.
Global reach, obviously.
Yeah.
Interactivity users become part of the spreading mechanism themselves. And immediacy, it happens instantly. And it's crucial to remember, it's not just state actors doing this, though they're big players.
Like the Russian troll farms mentioned in the 2016 U.S. election.
Yeah, the sources cite that they reached potentially up to 126 million Facebook users. That's a huge number.
But it's not just governments, right? There's a big economic incentive, too.
Absolutely. It's created this whole dark, lucrative industry. Remember the story about the Macedonian teenagers back in 2016?
Vaguely, yeah. They were setting up fake news sites.
Hundreds of them, reportedly making millions just by pumping out sensational false news aimed at U.S. voters to generate ad revenue. Disinformation is literally a business model, and social media is the perfect distribution channel.
So the scale is undeniable. What about the actual impact? Does it really change voters' minds, or is it just adding to the noise?
That's the million-dollar question, and the sources are cautious here. It's really hard to definitively quantify how much it changes views. Often, disinformation targets people already likely to believe it reinforces existing biases. That's the selection effect.
So it preaches to the choir, mostly.
Largely, yes. Some 2016 research suggested the overall impact might have been limited because only a specific group was heavily exposed. And interestingly, one data point showed users over 65 shared fake news almost 7 times more often than the youngest group.
So maybe it doesn't sway the masses, but it could be potent with certain demographics or the already polarized.
And that's exactly why it remains a threat. Firstly, in really close elections, think Bush v. Gore decided by a few hundred votes influencing even a tiny sliver of persuadable voters can be decisive.
Right.
And secondly, maybe even more importantly, even if it just confirms biases, the sheer volume erodes trust across the board. If most people believe they're constantly seeing fake news, as surveys suggest,
They stop trusting any information,
Yes.
even from legitimate sources.
exactly, it undermines trust in independent media, in institutions, everything. That's a huge problem for democracy.
And we can't talk about scale without talking about the tools used to create and spread this stuff. Automation.
Right, automated disinformation. Social bots are key here. These are algorithms that pretend to be human users. Troll farms use them massively.
To what? Just flood the zone with messages.
Flood the zone, yeah.
Yeah.
But also to create fake engagement, fake likes, comments, followers. This makes a fringe idea suddenly look like it has broad support, boosting its perceived credibility instantly.
Making it seem like a real movement when it's just bots.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And then you have the next level of credibility problem, AI generating things like deep fakes.
Manipulated videos and audio.
Yeah, incredibly realistic fake videos, images, audio. These can be used to smear politicians, incite violence, make it look like someone said or did something they absolutely never did. It's getting harder and harder to tell what's real.
And this stuff spreads faster than truth.
There's evidence for that, yeah. The sources mention the novelty hypothesis. False news often spreads faster and wider. Because it's novel, it's designed to provoke strong emotions like shock or anger, which makes people more likely to share it. Okay, this is pretty bleak. Let's move to the fourth pillar, moderation, which sounds like it should be part of the solution. But the sources say it creates its own risks. It's paradoxical.
It really is. This brings us squarely to the censorship risk. Platforms are stuck, right? They have legal duties to remove illegal stuff, terrorism, child abuse material.
But then there's pressure to remove things that are just harmful but maybe not illegal.
Exactly. And when private companies start making those kinds of political judgments about what speech is acceptable, that's a direct threat to freedom of expression, a fundamental right.
And given the insane amount of content, they have to rely on automated tools, right? Which leads to the automation dilemma.
A huge dilemma. Firstly, using AI for moderation leads to way more errors. False positives taking down legitimate content by mistake, and false negatives missing genuinely harmful stuff.
Like hate speech that uses coded language. Or exactly, bias baked into the algorithm itself. Discriminating algorithms. Studies have shown that tools trained to flag hate speech can sometimes disproportionately flag content from minority groups just because of their specific language or slang.
And the algorithms are secret, the black box problem again.
Right. No transparency. And censoring content can backfire badly. There's the backlash effect.
What's that?
When content gets flagged or removed, the people who shared it often feel like they're being unfairly targeted by elites or the system. It can actually make them dig in their heels and believe the false information even more strongly.
Huh. And the other effect?
The implied truth effect. If people get used to seeing warning labels on fake news, they might start assuming that anything without a label must be true. It lowers their critical guard for everything else.
And just removing content doesn't make the ideas go away, does it? It just pushes people elsewhere.
That's the fragmentation risk. If the big platforms like Facebook or Twitter crack down harder on certain types of speech, say conservative views in the US, as an example used in the sources, those users might migrate to smaller, more radical platforms like Parler or Gab, where there's little to no moderation.
Making the echo chambers even more intense and harder to reach.
Exactly. It deepens the divides. And all this points to what the EPRS calls the fundamental democratic risk here. Uncontrolled or bare, mock, uncontrollable power.
The power of these private companies.
Yes. Private platforms, ultimately driven by profit, are making these incredibly high-stakes decisions about public speech, about who gets heard, about access to information. And they're doing it with zero democratic oversight or real public accountability. The rules are often unclear, applied inconsistently, arbitrarily even.
Can you give an example of that inconsistency?
Sure. The source highlights the kind of perceived hypocrisy when, say, a platform bans a democratically elected leader, citing maybe incitement risks.
Like the Trump bans.
For example, while at the same time, actual dictators or autocrats in other countries are allowed to keep using the platform, often as a tool to suppress their own people. These decisions have global human rights implications, but they're made in corporate boardrooms, often based on market considerations, not democratic principles.
Okay, that leads us to the fifth and final pillar, micro-targeting and electoral subversion. This is where the surveillance data gets weaponized for political campaigns.
Right. Political micro-targeting uses all that data we talked about, browsing history, likes, inferred personality traits, everything plus predictive modeling, to identify incredibly specific, tiny groups of people.
And then what? Send them tailored ads.
Exactly. Highly personalized political messages, refined using A/B testing to see exactly what wording, what image pushes the right buttons for that specific microgroup.
This goes way beyond just targeting by age or location, like old school advertising.
Oh yeah. It aims for psychological vulnerabilities. And that's the threat to democratic self-determination. It's often covert, playing on subconscious fears or desires. It bypasses that rational, enlightened understanding process. You're being manipulated by customized content, and you probably don't even realize it's happening or why you're seeing it.
And because it's hidden, it messes with election transparency rules.
Absolutely. It completely subverts rules about campaign finance disclosure and message transparency, because different groups might be getting totally different, maybe even contradictory messages, all invisible to the wider public and regulators. And it's particularly dangerous in really close elections.
Especially in winner-take-all systems.
Definitely. The sources again point to the 2016 U.S. election. Trump's victory came down to about 80,000 votes across 3 key states, when margins are that thin.
Targeting specific, persuadable microgroups becomes incredibly powerful.
Immensely. Now, the exact impact in past elections is still debated. Causality is hard to prove. But the sources stress the risk is only growing. Political and economic incentives are pushing this, and the technology, especially AI-driven persuasive content, is just getting better and cheaper. The potential for manipulation in future elections is significant.
Okay, wow. We've laid out a pretty detailed picture of those 5 big systemic risks from the European Parliament's analysis. It's clear that just regulating the tech isn't enough, right?
Yeah, definitely not.
But
Which brings us perfectly to the second part of our dive. Pivoting from those system flaws to the human solution, the individual media competence. Media competence. And we're drawing heavily here on the practical guidance from the ZHAW.
so what is media competence exactly? Is it just knowing how to use apps?
It's much more than that. The core definition is the ability to use media consciously and responsibly. It's layered. Yes, technical skills are part of it, but crucially, it includes critically assessing content, thinking about your own media use, being careful with your personal data.
And knowing when to switch off digital separation.
Yes, recognizing the need for that and actually doing it.
We hear about digital natives, young people who grew up with this stuff. Does that mean they automatically have this competence?
That's a common misconception the sources tackle directly. They make a really important distinction. Youth are often way ahead of adults on the technical side. They learn by doing, they pick up new apps fast, they're fluent users. But adults, with their life experience and hopefully broader understanding, are crucial for teaching the critical analysis part, how to evaluate what you're seeing. What are the social or legal consequences of posting something? That requires guidance.
So parents and educators have a huge role, even if they feel like they're not the tech experts in the house.
It's absolutely vital, and it starts with role modeling. Parents need to be mindful of their own media habits. The sources actually mention that many kids get really annoyed by how much their parents are on their phones.
Huh, I can believe that. Especially if the kid doesn't know if it's work or just scrolling.
Exactly. So parents need to show conscious use, practice digital downtime themselves, make those media-free times sacred to demonstrate that life happens offline too.
Okay, so beyond role modeling, what are the really specific areas where parents need to step up and help kids build this competence?
The ZHAW guidance points to 4 key areas. First, content evaluation. Teaching kids how to question info, check sources, is this news, is it opinion? Who made this?
I get.
Data handling. Explaining clearly what personal info should never be shared online and why. Things like full name, address, school.
Third is boundaries, screen time.
Yes, setting boundaries, negotiating screen time together, establishing media-free zones. And fourth, and this is so important, being a trusted contact.
Meaning the kid feels safe coming to you if something bad happens online.
Exactly. Without fearing they'll just get yelled at or have their phone taken away immediately. They need to know they can report bad experiences, harassment, seeing disturbing content, anything, and get support.
Let's zoom in on the main digital hangouts for young people. Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. The sources talk about a dual nature here, opportunities and risks.
Yeah, for teenagers especially, these platforms meet really important developmental needs. They're key for communicating with friends, obviously, but also for identity formation.
Trying out different personas, seeing how people react.
Kind of, yeah. Experimenting with self-representation. And they also feed that basic need for social affirmation, the likes, the views, the comments. It's seeking validation from the peer group, which is a normal, if sometimes fraught, part of adolescence.
But the risks tied to chasing that validation, they seem pretty intense.
They can be severe. The sources list specific dangers, contact with strangers, potentially malicious ones, we'll get to cyber grooming later, but also the psychological toll of constant social comparison.
Comparing yourself to these perfect, often filtered images online.
Right, which can lead to loops of negative self-worth, body image issues, serious mental health impacts like depression and anxiety, because the comparison is basically rigged against you.
And the stuff you post as a teenager can come back to bite you later.
Absolutely. That digital footprint is persistent. Embarrassing photos, ill-considered comments, things shared years ago could potentially surface during a job application or background check. And related to this is sharenting.
That's when parents post pictures of their kids online.
Yes. And the sources are quite firm that this carries real risks that parents often underestimate.
Ethical risks, legal risks.
Both. What a parent thinks is a cute baby picture might be deeply embarrassing to the child later on. Worse, those images can be scraped and misused by strangers, even for child sexual abuse material. Parents have a duty to protect their child's image rights.
So get consent from older kids before posting.
Definitely. And for younger kids who can't consent, the parents bear the full responsibility. They need to be incredibly cautious about what they share and with whom.
Okay, another big part of youth digital life now is the influencer, the content creator. They're like modern idols.
In many ways, yes. They often share seemingly personal details, creating this sort of illusion of intimacy like you're their friend, maybe through DMs or live streams. But the critical thing to teach kids here relates back to disinformation, the economic motive.
They're getting paid, right? It's advertising.
A lot of the time, yes. They're paid for recommendations, but it's often disguised. Sponsorships, discount codes, even beauty filters can subtly promote brands. It deliberately blurs the line between a genuine peer sharing something cool and a paid ad.
So the risk is kids absorbing values that are really just commercial interests.
Exactly. If they lack the critical skills to see the commercial angle, they might internalize opinions, values, even stereotypes that are pushed for financial or sometimes political reasons. The sources warn this can normalize problematic views or reinforce rigid gender roles. Boys are tough, girls are just about looks.
So media competence here means teaching kids to spot the hashtag ad, essentially, and question the message.
Spot the ad, question the values, understand the business behind it. Absolutely.
Let's get really practical now. Rules, guidelines. The ZHAW research tackles the big one, screen time. What's the advice?
The key takeaway from ZHAW is that just counting minutes isn't the whole story. Quality of use, the context, and overall balance are more important. Is there enough time for sleep, sports, hobbies, real-world socializing? That's the priority.
But they do offer some time limits as a guide for parents who need a starting point.
They do, as orientation. For babies under 1, basically 0 screen time is best for development. Toddlers, maybe 1 to 4 years old, very limited, like 5–10 minutes a day. And always with an adult, maybe a quick video call with grandma.
Okay. And older kids.
For kindergarten and early school age, say 5 to 8 years, the guideline is max 30 to 60 minutes a day. Older kids, 9 to 10, maybe into 100 minutes max per day. The rationale is really about protecting time for active play and learning that develops cognitive and motor skills.
And as they get older, it's less about minutes and more about boundaries.
Exactly. For older kids and teens, it shifts to negotiating maybe a weekly time budget, but more importantly, setting firm media-free times and places. Bedrooms at night should absolutely be screen-free zones to protect sleep. No devices during meals or important family chats.
And the ZHAW warns against using screen time as a reward or punishment.
Yeah, that's counterproductive.
Right.
It just makes the device seem even more important and desirable. The best approach is negotiating rules together, explaining the reasons clearly, and being consistent.
Okay, let's talk about a really nasty online threat. Cyberbullying or cybermobbing.
This is defined as intentional, repeated harassment, using digital tools, texts, social media, whatever to defame, humiliate, or threaten someone. And it's different from offline bullying in some really crucial ways.
How so?
It's often anonymous, which makes people bolder. It spreads incredibly fast and wide, so the victim feels like there's no escape. And the harmful content, the messages, the pictures can stay online forever, constantly re-traumatizing the victim.
And the impact is worse.
The evidence suggests yes. Victims of cyberbullying seem to have a significantly higher risk of severe mental health issues, including self-harm and suicidal thoughts, compared to victims of only offline bullying. It's incredibly serious.
So prevention is key. Teaching etiquette, empathy.
Yes, and also the legal side. In places like Switzerland, kids are criminally liable from age 10. Schools and parents need to work together on this, and if it happens, the advice is clear. Don't engage online. Tell a trusted adult immediately, block the bully, and save the evidence screenshots before trying to get content removed.
Okay, lastly in this section, a really sensitive area. Youth sexuality online, pornography, sexting, grooming. This requires careful handling.
Extremely careful, and parents need both openness and legal awareness. Regarding porn, the average age kids first see it as disturbingly young, around 13, often earlier for boys.
And the risks are distorted views of sex, gender stereotypes.
Primarily, yes. Unrealistic expectations about sex and relationships, reinforcing harmful stereotypes. Legally, the key thing to know is that making pornographic content accessible to anyone under 16 is a crime, even if the person sharing it is also a minor. Parents finding this stuff need to ensure it's deleted and the child understands the legal risks.
What about sexting? Kids sharing explicit pictures or messages of themselves consensually.
This is legally complex. Generally, it's not a crime if it's consensual. The participants are close in age, usually defined as less than a 3-year difference. And crucially, no one involved is under 16.
But the risks are still huge, even if it's not illegal.
Massive. The biggest risks aren't prosecution, but social fallout. Revenge sharing when an ex shares private images is devastating. And then there's sextortion.
Extortion using those images.
Yes. Criminals threaten to publish the intimate photos or videos unless the victim pays money or provides even more explicit material. It's a terrifying form of blackmail. Talking openly with kids about consent, permanence, and the huge risks of sharing such content is absolutely essential.
And the most predatory risk, cyber grooming. Adults targeting kids online.
Cyber grooming is when adults specifically target minors online to build trust with the intention of sexual abuse. And critically, under the law in many places, the attempt alone is punishable. Groomers are often very skilled manipulators.
How do they operate?
They try to build rapport quickly, create dependency, maybe offer gifts or attention, and then crucially, try to move the conversation off the main platform to a private chat messenger, WhatsApp, video call to avoid detection.
What are the warning signs parents should teach kids?
Key signs include conversations quickly turning sexual, offers of money or gifts, constant pressure for private photos, and urgent requests to switch to private chat channels. If any of that happens, the child needs to tell a trusted adult immediately, and these attempts should be reported to the police. Okay, so we've covered the big systemic risks and the need for individual media competence. Now let's loop back to the policy level. What is the EU actually doing or proposing to tackle these 5 pillars of risk? We're back to the EPRS analysis here.
Right. The strategy seems pretty broad, starting with tackling market power and data control.
Exactly. That brings us to the Digital Markets Act, the DMA. Its main targets are the huge platforms, the gatekeepers, aiming to stop them abusing their dominant position.
How does that help with the risks we discussed?
Well, for instance, it restricts how they can merge user data from different services without explicit consent. That directly pushes back against unchecked surveillance. It also mandates things like data portability, letting you easily take your data to a competitor, and interoperability between services.
Data portability sounds technical. Why is that important for democracy?
It's all about user economy and fostering competition. If you can easily move your photos, your friend list, your whole digital life to a different platform, the big players can't just rely on locking you in anymore.
They actually have to compete on things like privacy, ethics, service quality.
Exactly. Lower switching costs mean more pressure on dominant platforms to behave better. It helps create a more open, diverse digital space, which is healthier for democratic discourse.
Okay, so that's market power. What about the content issues? Disinformation, moderation. That's where the Digital Services Act, the DSA, comes in.
Yes, the DSA is the EU's big attempt to bring accountability to platform decision-making, tackling that uncontrollable mock problem. It sets out rules for all online platforms, but especially the very large online platforms and search engines, VLOPs and VLOPs.
What kind of rules?
They have to publish really clear policies on content moderation, including how their algorithms work. And they have to apply those rules consistently and fairly, not arbitrarily. This aims to reduce unfair censorship.
And the DSA also makes the big platforms tackle systemic risks head-on, like the filter bubbles, election interference stuff.
This is really the core of it. VLOPs and VLSCs now have a legal duty to conduct regular, independent risk assessments. They have to look specifically for risks like disinformation campaigns, manipulation affecting elections or public health, and negative effects on fundamental rights.
And then they have to act on those assessments.
Yes, they have to actively implement measures to mitigate those identified risks. And this is huge and was fought over for a long time. They now have to grant vetted researchers access to their data.
To study how these risks actually play out, opening up the black box.
Precisely. Allowing independent academic scrutiny of platform operations and impact, that's a major step toward transparency.
Okay, so DMA for competition, DSA for content and accountability. What about the fifth risk, micro-targeting in politics?
The EU is taking a particularly tough line here, too, with specific regulations proposed for political advertising.
What's the approach?
2 main things: radical transparency and restricting invasive techniques. All paid political ads will have to be clearly labeled, with searchable databases showing who paid, how much, and who was targeted.
And the restrictions?
Crucially, the proposal includes a ban on using sensitive personal data for political targeting. That means data revealing things like your ethnicity, religion, health status, or sexual orientation couldn't be used to tailor political ads to you. The idea is that the general GDPR rules weren't enough to stop manipulative micro-targeting in elections.
So, trying to restore some integrity there, let's connect this back to AI. It keeps cropping up in moderation, disinformation, targeting. The black box problem seems central.
It really is. Algorithms are usually trade secrets, intellectual property. That secrecy makes it incredibly hard for anyone outside, regulators, researchers, the public, to know if they're biased, if they're fair, if they're accidentally amplifying harm or polarization.
The DSA tries to address this with transparency and audits.
It does. But the sources also caution that transparency and explainability for complex AI are still really difficult technical and ethical challenges. It's an ongoing struggle.
And AI isn't just a policy problem, it's right there in kids' daily lives now, needing new kinds of media competence.
Absolutely. AI drives their Netflix suggestions, powers Siri, finishes their sentences and texts. But now, media competence has to include critically evaluating AI-generated content.
Like stuff from ChatGPT, kids need to know it might not be accurate or even real.
Exactly. They need to understand that the text, the image, maybe even the video they're seeing could be entirely synthetic. And they need awareness of how things like AI-driven social bots are used to manipulate online conversations and fake consensus.
Which brings us right back around to the human element being crucial. Regulation fixes the platform, but not the person using it.
That seems to be the consensus from the sources, yes. Policy measures like the DMA and DSA are vital, but they have to go hand in hand with building resilient, informed citizens. That means supporting independent media, fact-checkers, and robust media literacy education. That media competence to help people develop and maintain that enlightened understanding.
Without that parallel track, the laws might always be playing catch-up with the tech.
That's the fear. You need both systemic fixes and individual resilience. Tag outro outro. So, to kind of wrap up this whole deep dive, we started with the early promise of social media for democracy, more access, more voices. But the reality, driven by the platform's core business model, has created these 5 major systemic risks: surveillance, personalization, disinformation, flawed moderation, and micro-targeting, all seriously threatening democratic fundamentals like autonomy, equality, and informed debate.
And the response has to be two-pronged. On one hand, strong state regulation, things like the DMA and DSA trying to control market power, demand transparency, and curb manipulative practices. But equally important, on the other hand, is building individual resilience through media and competence, equipping everyone, especially young people, to navigate this complex digital world critically and responsibly.
But there's a final deeper question lurking in the EPR's analysis, sort of warning about potentially misdiagnosing the core problem. It suggests that maybe focusing too much on fixing the tech, the algorithms, the filter bubbles might distract us from more fundamental issues.
What if our entire focus on fixing the algorithms and regulating the platforms merely distracts us from the more complex underlying failures of trust and civic engagement, such as rising inequality, economic disenfranchisement, and public dissatisfaction with political institutions that made social media such a potent and destabilizing threat to democracy in the first place?
Yeah. If the underlying social conditions for democracy, like basic trust, like a sense of fairness and participation, are already eroding, then maybe just changing the platform or regulating the algorithm only treats the symptoms, not the underlying disease. It suggests the real solutions might need to reach far beyond just the digital sphere.
Something to definitely think about. How do your own media habits connect to these bigger democratic challenges? We encourage you to mull that over this week. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the dual crisis of digital democracy and media competence.